Greetings, my friends. I'm Paper Ninja. Today, I'm going to be talking about another game instead of my usual Fantasy Bane Wars. I just want a small break from FMW, as the next two videos for FMW I'm making are huge time investments. So, I've got this one to help stave some of the burnout off. I was browsing through Touhou Mystia Izakaya, and other than full videos of boss battles, there isn't actually a concise tip or guide for each of the boss battles for the game. This video seeks to help remedy that. Be warned that if you're watching this, there are massive spoilers, since we're exposing all the major fights in the game. If you're still fine with that, go ahead and proceed. With that out of the way, let's get started. Starting with Yomu's trials, you will come face to face with her as a boss at the end of the Hakare Shrine section. Yomu will pull you away, and without any warning, you'll be taken to an Izakaya section. Yomu will tell you what you have to do, and the battle will begin. Whether you succeed or fail makes no impact. The game will tell you so, other than changing some dialogue. Luckily, Yomu's trials aren't too daunting as long as you have some strategy in mind. Important to note is that for all these trials and boss fights, you won't have access to a partner, so you have to do everything yourself. For trial 1, you will need to make a certain amount of money each time for 3 rounds. 1,000 in round 1, 2,000 in round 2, and 3,000 in round 3. You will also be given a preset amount of materials to work with, so the more recipes you have, the better. Any drinks you have on hand will cap out at 15. All guests that you will face will be from previous areas. If you haven't hit the money requirement before closing time, you will immediately fail. There's no overtime like regular Izakaya nights either, so keep that in mind. You would think that you have to do some tough task of managing all your drinks and ingredients, but the easiest way is just to use the one recipe strategy. Basically, you'll choose one recipe, preferably something not very cheap, and that will be the only thing you will cook for the round. Don't put any other recipe on the menu. For drinks, only put green tea, although if you're concerned, you could put multiple other drinks. Then, mass pick the tableware that you can cook on. You'll want at least 2 tableware. Once the trial begins, go ahead and start pre-cooking the one recipe you have. If it finishes before any guest arrives or has started ordering, just store it and keep cooking the same thing. Now, let's talk about a tactic we'll be using for every boss from here on: rushing for hyper mode. What this means is that you use any easy recipe or a recipe you're currently using for the Izakaya section in order to rush for hyper mode. The reason you want to rush hyper mode, even if you're not going to use the food you'll be cooking, is because the buffs from hyper mode are so substantial that it is absolutely worth using burner dishes, like the rice balls, in order to enter hyper mode. For us in particular, the most relevant here is toss serving and instant eating. Toss serving saves you so much time, as you no longer have to run to tables to serve, but also allows you to pull up any guest's order, freezing the time and allowing you to take time to see what you want to do next. Instant eating is pretty much what it says. It saves you time, as you no longer have to wait for guests to finish eating, meaning you can see what they want to eat and drink right away. If you're saving time, you're probably serving more guests and making more money. Starting off for pretty much every boss fight from here on, rush for a hyper mode by cooking the chosen recipe, and once you have it, and guest orders appear, start dumping all the food towards them. Since generic guests can only order from the menu, they can only order the same thing, making them easy to feed. You have an infinite amount of green tea as well, so you don't have to worry about your low stocks of drinks. On rounds 2 and 3, just use a more expensive recipe. This one's really not that hard. Now, Trial 2 occurs after you finish the Scarlet Devil Mansion. Yomu will pull you aside again, and you'll be forced to another Izakaya section. Trial 2 includes rare guests, along with a higher money count requirement. Additionally, you'll need to activate the positive spell cards of rare guests a certain amount of times, but that's not really that difficult if you remember your usual recipe for them. If you get a tag for them that sucks, like this one, you can always use a Night Sparrow kitchenware to just ignore the crappy tags. This is arguably even easier, as you now use all your own ingredients and drinks. The same strategy for Trial 1 works, and you can just set your most expensive recipe as the only one normal guest can order. 50 to 75 yen is generally where you want your recipe to be to make the money required, and you can use other drinks besides green tea. Don't worry about losing your ingredients either, as at the end of the trial, it will all be returned to you. The usual tactics apply. Rush hyper mode so that guests finish eating instantly and you don't have to run towards them to serve. Since you want to make as much money as possible, serve rare guests, especially Kasen, Wriggle, and Tenshi, since they help you get more money directly. Other rare guests aren't as impactful as them. But you still want to serve them and drain their budget. Use rare guests to serve expensive drinks so you can drain their budget even faster. Guests won't pay until they leave, so if you drain their budget completely, they'll be forced to leave, paying you immediately. Overall, Route 2 isn't very difficult either, especially since you'll probably have more resources to work with. Here we come to the easiest of the 4 bosses, but can still provide a challenge if you aren't quick. Yugo's difficulty was nerfed in the second phase, making her much easier now. I suggest that you do some preparation here and stock some of the expensive ingredients such as Wagyu beef, Ibriko pork, and premium tuna. You'll also want high alcohol drinks, and get your hand on more of those. Yugo has expensive taste, and it'll be much easier to handle phase 3 of this battle if you have access to more of them. High alcohol drinks include the Tango Tango, Godfather, and Full Moon's Eve. Also, side note, you might want to purposefully fail this boss fight once, just for the achievement. Anyway, just like Yomu's trials, this part is divided into 3 phases, but these ones are different at least. Now, phase 1 is undoubtedly the easiest, and you probably have to actively try and fail. You serve normal guests, and you only need to fill up the meter from successful orders. Just serve as you normally would from a standard izakaya night. No fancy strategy here needed, but you can still use the solo recipe one if you want. Phase 2 is when things start getting much tougher, to where the developer found it enough to nerf. Here, you have nothing but rare guests. You'll need to trigger 5 positive spell cards. However, every 10 seconds, you'll have to suffer a punishment spell card from a random rare guest currently in your izakaya. While this one does have some RNG in it, there are things you can do to help mitigate some of it to make it easier on yourself. First thing to know is that any of your rare guests from the base game can show up. There's no DLC characters at all. The second is that this phase is essentially a sprint, not an endurance round. You want to get through this phase as quickly as possible, as it can quickly spiral out of control for you if you stay in it too long. Lastly, many of the spell cards can be ignored, as they don't impact you enough to force you to handle them. Since that's the case, there's a couple characters that should be prioritized in serving, which I've decided to list. The high danger priority characters are defined as characters who can actively stop you from either cooking or fulfilling your objective at all. This includes Kane, Pacholi, Oko, and Cerno of all characters. Kane will stun you for a lengthy period of time, causing a domino effect. Pacholi makes your food turn into dark matter 50% of the time, making it much harder to successfully cook. Oko turns all positive ratings into neutral ones, which might as well just be a restart from aforementioned domino effect. And Cerno freezes half of your kitchenware, and if you so happen to need those to serve, tough luck. Rumio can also be included on here, depending on how badly you need to decide to maneuver. Everybody else is pretty much a low priority, as they either don't inhibit you from doing anything or actively help you. You might, for example, get lucky and have Wriggle trigger her spell card, forcing all the rare guests out, making it much easier to handle them one at a time. Mei Ling and Tenchi both destroy tables, and if they destroy tables with high priority targets on them, then you no longer have to deal with them. Rainbow might be an exception to being low priority and can be moved to high priority if you like, since her spell card is incredibly beneficial for you. If you successfully get a pink rating with her and activate a reward spell card, she'll give you a buff that blocks 1 spell card, something you should already be familiar with having done Tahakure Shrine. Blocking a spell card here grants you an extra 10 seconds of freedom, and guarantees that you'll be safe. So that's a list of characters you'll want to deal with immediately. Let's move on to direct tips. First, before any rare guests show up, rush for hyper mode immediately. Use all of your tableware to cook something cheap to enter it, as you don't want to waste any time moving towards the table to serve. Store all the food in storage too to create room, or dump them. Second, you want to be proactive. As soon as you see a rare guest sit down, they need some time to order. However, if you're already familiar with the guest's preferences, you can already start cooking for them if you have a planned recipe for the character. If you want to be 100% safe after rushing hyper mode, use Night Sparrow Kitchenware to guarantee that you'll hit all 3 tags for a rare guest. That still works here. The faster you get this done, the faster you're done with this phase. You can actually finish this within a minute if you're quick, and the RNG isn't too heavily set against you. If you can get past this, you'll enter the final stretch. Phase 3 is typically a victory lap. You can still lose if you're a bit slow, but nowhere near as difficult as Phase 2. If you've done the prep work of getting high alcohol drinks and expensive ingredients, this will go by much faster. Basically, Yuyuko is a rare guest with their own set of preferences that you have to hit 3 of every single time. These are our tags here. Chinese and Japanese are the worst to really handle, but the rest are incredibly easy. If you've been stocking Ibariko pork, premium tuna, Wagyu beef, or even truffles, this will be a cinch since you can easily get many of these tags by just putting one of them into whatever recipe you're using. You can technically use whatever you want since you can just put ingredients in to make up for the tags. For example, a rice ball in any of the ingredients I talk about will work for Yuyuko so long as it isn't the Chinese tag. Personally, I like using the Shiryuki if she asks for the Japanese tag, the rainbow pan-fried pork buns for the Chinese tag, since these also fulfill pretty much the rest of her tags too. You can get the Shiryuki from Kane's bun at level 3 to 4, and the rainbow pan-fried pork buns from Mei Ling's bun at level 3 to 4. Choose 2 recipes to fulfill the Chinese and Japanese tag, preferably one with a lot of room to use other ingredients to combine with if you need. Then, pick multiples of the kitchenware you need to cook those recipes and get started. Once you begin, just start cooking both recipes involving the Japanese or Chinese tag, with at least 2 of the other tags fulfilled from ingredients I mentioned, like the Wagyu beef or premium tuna. Don't stop cooking and have all your kitchenware to cook the same recipes you have on the menu. Have an equal amount for Chinese and Japanese, and just shove completed ones with whatever tag she wants for a drink down Yuyuko's throat. If she asks for an unexpected tag, the Night Sparrow kitchenware still works here. You'll fill the bar up incredibly quickly, and within not even 2 minutes, you can have this fight done. That's it. That's the Yuyuko fight. But we're not done with her quite yet, as she's got a retrial you can do after the end of the game. Yuyuko's retrial doesn't look too bad at first. Phase 1 and 2 are the exact same. Any strategies that you use for Yuyuko's first fight still work here. There's no difference between this one and the story mode version. Instead, all the change is in the final phase. You still want to be careful of phase 2 though, as it's easy to fail there if things spiral out of control, but be vigilant. Now, phase 3 is very different. Instead of mass feeding just one Yuyuko, you now have to deal with multiple Yuyuko shadows. And unlike rare guests, these shadows will pull up random orders from your recipe book, but you also still need to fulfill Yuyuko's desired tags, as if she's still a rare guest. You're still going to want a good stock of ingredients again. Since a recipe that Yuyuko Shadow wants is completely random and might ask for a scarce ingredient, you don't know exactly how much you'll need. Get however much you feel comfortable with, so long as you don't run dry. The drink she asks for is completely random too, so make sure you have a good stock of drinks, as Yuyuko can ask for any drink that you currently have. She'll never want a DLC drink or recipe though, so you're safe on that end. Starting off, make sure to field kitchenware so that you can serve all recipes. Don't leave something like the steamer out, or you won't be able to cook something that requires it. This makes it hard to double down on kitchenware, unlike the story mode Yuyuko, but there's nothing you can do about that. Second, don't bother with Night Sparrow kitchenware since it only works on the main Yuyuko, who functions like a normal rare guest. Use other ones that don't slow down your cooking instead. You want a bit more speed to fulfill the Yuyuko Shadow's orders. Even if you're doing everything correct, and the amount of damage and time you have is the same, the Shadow's orders prevents easy spamming. This makes this part much harder than the story version. This sounds daunting, but we have another in-game mechanic that we can use to help us. The priority system lets you set favorite recipes and is intended to let you find recipes quickly. However, we can take advantage of this mechanic. Since most people aren't going to remember all the recipes in the game, this is a quick way to find it. To do this, hit the apostrophe button to access the storage. You can do this anytime during gameplay, as long as you aren't in a menu or interacting with anything. Then go to the Cuisines tab. From here, you can prioritize a recipe that you don't know. What prioritizing does is make it so that even if you don't have a recipe on the menu, you can still quickly make it without having to input all the ingredients manually. Then, when you go to the tableware, you can see the prioritized recipe here. This is extremely useful for bosses like Yuyuko, as well as DLC bosses 1 and 2, who love throwing out random recipes you will likely not remember the ingredients of. You can prioritize up to 20 recipes too, so don't be hesitant on using this as you need. Once you're done with the recipe, you can just remove it, then prioritize whatever else Yuyuko asks for. If you don't want to do that, you can also just check what tags whatever food Yuyuko wants, then input it into your tag finder, though this can get tedious pretty quickly. You must make sure that any food you serve is orange or pink rating. You have to deal 1000 damage to Yuyuko, just like in story mode. A pink rating will do 40 damage to the actual Yuyuko, while an orange will only do 20 damage to the shadows or Yuyuko herself. A green does 0. From here on out, your hyper mode buff does not freeze the waiting time of a boss, so don't count on it. Keep up the cooking and use expensive ingredients to catch most of her tags, and you'll eventually win. If you lose, just keep at it and retry. For a retrial, this is a rough one, it might need some practice. Winning here unlocks Yuyuko as a rare guest for your Izakaya, so congratulations if you win. Now we come to the first DLC. Strangely enough, for being the first DLC boss, this is in my opinion one of the hardest fights possible in the entire game. You can be completely subjected to RNG here, which can screw you over. Yuma has 2 gimmicks. The first gimmick is that she'll ask for 2 of her required tags, on the bottom right here. These tags are completely random, but she's programmed now not to have conflicting ones, like refreshing and hot, same dish. Every recipe you serve needs to have these 2 tags, along with her requested tag. You only need the one she's specifically asking for on her order, and the tags on the bottom right. Don't even think of using a Night Sparrow kitchenware here, since it doesn't work at all. Use other kitchenware instead. Like Yuyuko, you need to deal 1000 damage to Yuma. Every 100 damage you do to Yuma will reset her 2 required tags. Every pink rating you get does 30 damage to Yuma. A green does 10, and orange does 20. Do your best to absolutely avoid messing up orders with Yuma. If you fail an order with Yuma, her frenzy meter will rise up dramatically. Speaking of, Yuma's second gimmick is at the top here, called her frenzy energy meter. This bar fills up whenever you give her any drink with alcohol. The more alcohol you give her, the more this will fill up. No alcohol gives none, low alcohol gives 2%, medium alcohol gives 5%, and high alcohol gives 8%. If you unfortunately fill this bar up completely, you will lose one of your tableware, permanently, for the rest of this fight. The bar will then reset, and the cycle continues. Therefore, it is important to avoid giving her as much alcohol as possible, so you don't screw yourself over. The first phase is the easiest, since you can be incredibly flexible with what you give Yuma. You'll just request as a rare guest normally does, with 2 additional tags, and whatever drink tag she wants. The easiest way to handle this is to just use a low-level recipe that doesn't have any conflicting tags, then use any ingredients to fulfill what she's asking for. For example, a rice ball has 4 extra slots for you to use whatever you want or need. For drinks, just avoid giving any high or even medium alcohol drinks when possible, since you want to minimize her frenzy energy. This phase ends once you get to 650 HP. It goes without saying that at this point in time, for the rest of this battle, you should be rushing hyper mode anytime it is not up, to save you time needing to move the tables. When each phase ends, all the orders currently available are completely reset, giving you a fresh new start. Use this to your advantage to help clear all the orders with medium and high alcohol orders. On phase 2, you start getting random orders, but you still have some rare guest orders to work with the tags required. You can avoid the random orders unless you're confident that the random order doesn't require a lot of ingredient slots, or you're out of rare guest orders. It's generally better to focus on the rare guest orders, since those give you the most flexibility. Otherwise, the strategy doesn't really change much from phase 1. Try to avoid the random orders that ask for medium or high alcohol, unless you have no choice, or the tags are easy to fulfill. Once you drop Yuma to 350 HP, you'll hit phase 3, the most hectic and RNG part. Phase 3 is all random orders and removes all rare guest orders. This is the worst phase, as these random orders can be any recipe and might ask for completely incompatible tags that end in dark matter, or you won't have enough empty slots to add whatever tags you need. Additionally, you have no choice but to serve whatever Yuma wants in terms of alcohol, making this the most likely point where her frenzy meter will be filled up at least once. If your RNG has been decent and you've been selective on which orders to take, you can actually win here without filling her frenzy meter even once. Pray that she doesn't destroy a tableware that you only have one of, since if she does, you won't be able to cook that type of food ever until the end. This is a good opportunity to use the priority system we talked about for Yigo again. Hit apostrophe and find the recipe that Yuma wants, prioritize it, and then when you cook it, just add whatever tags you need to it. Oh, and hope that the recipe she wants isn't a 4 or 5 ingredient one, where you'll have no room for additional tags you'll need. Try to prioritize orders with no, low, and medium alcohol only while avoiding all the ones with high alcohol. This will slow down the frenzy meter. While the infinite patience buff doesn't work on Yuma, it is possible to only need to serve a couple orders with high alcohol, due to all the orders resetting between each phase. Winning here unlocks Yuma as a rare guest that can show up in your izakaya. Welcome to DLC2's boss. On its own, it's not very difficult, though the game doesn't explain some of its mechanics well. Once again, the boss is divided into 3 phases, and the random tag makes its appearance again, leaving you subject to some RNG once more. The first phase has you serving random regular guests, but you're not able to see their orders at all. Instead, you have to serve them food that they like, depending on their species. To progress, you need to keep getting orange ratings until you max out on the counter. Having to look at the book over and over per guest seems overwhelming at first, but there's 2 solid, low-level recipes you can use with some modification. The first is the pork stir-fry, which works on the following customers here. The other is the carved roast salad, which works on these guests. The one exception is the yokai rabbit, which needs a fruit and green tea instead. Keep in mind that any recipe can work as long as you hit the tags. These are just 2 that are pretty cost-effective and use common materials. For drinks, the divine wheat is extremely good in tandem with the pork stir-fry, guaranteeing an orange rating. You can also try another medium alcohol here. I use this since some of the customers also have the neat tag. For any guest that likes the carved roast salad, any low alcohol drinks works. The meal works for everybody except the yokai rabbit. You can just serve them the free green tea. If you have extra resources and want to trivialize this phase even further, you can use the pork stir-fry with a truffle, which fulfills pretty much every guest here except one. Double or even triple down the frying pans and cutting boards if you use these recipes, since you won't need any other recipe to succeed here. If you have a better recipe, however, feel free to use that and just double down the kitchenware for it. Once you hit the required number of orange ratings, you move on to Phase 2. Phase 2's goals is similar to Yuriko's Phase 2 in that you need to trigger a certain amount of spell cards. However, you don't have to deal with the punishment spell card every 10 seconds. This phase only has rare guests, but with a twist. You'll have one random tag on the bottom right that all recipes that you serve will need, in addition to fulfilling a rare guest's tags. If you don't, you'll get an automatic black rating, triggering their spell card. If you have a recipe you commonly use for rare guest, it'll work so long as you have the extra ingredient slots, or doesn't cause it to become dark matter. Every recipe you send out has to be a pink rating, no oranges or below. And don't get cheeky with the Night Sparrow equipment here, because it doesn't work again. The tag changes every 30 seconds, so if the timer is about to run out, don't make anything new and wait for the next tag, so you don't accidentally trigger a black rating. There's no priority system for rare guests here, other than maybe Reimu, who can protect you if you screw up by accident. This phase isn't too difficult, though this phase ensures that you do want a decent stock of ingredients, since it can ask for tags like Wonderful, an incredibly inconvenient one to get, since the ingredients that have it are rare ones. This phase is a little RNG on the tag, but at least it's not Yuma's Phase 3, where it's 2 tags in a strict order. Last is Phase 3, where you take on Koishi herself. She's got a main body seated, then 7 shadows who will order recipes like a regular guest, on top of still requiring the tag on the bottom right, that resets every so often. Above each of their heads is a tag that's hidden. This phase is divided into what I call Investigation Phase and Damage Phase. In investigation phase, your objective is to find out what Koishi's main body wants for her recipe, as well as her drink. You do this by getting pink ratings from her shadows that are hiding each of her recipe's tags. Dealing with her shadows to find her tags is a little similar to Yuma's phase 2 and 3, in that you need to serve a strict order, plus the random tag. Unfortunately, you can still be subjected to some RNG here, where the tag might cause some recipes to create dark matter. Once again, this is another opportunity to use the priority system. You can actually skip the black tags, and only focus on what a recipe has and what drink she wants. Most of the time, the 4 tags she'll want will lead you to something super specific, making the black tags completely useless. This saves you some time, which is not really needed for this fight, but much more useful for the retry on Lunatic. Search up the tags on your notebook to decipher what she wants. Once you serve Koishi the correct order, she'll start shaking and enter into what I call damage phase. In damage phase, you can serve her whatever you want, and it will increase the counter on the bottom right. However, the way it feels is not explained very well to you. The way it increases is dependent on the combined level of the food and drink that you give her. For example, if you serve a level 1 rice ball and a level 2 milk, you'll do 3 damage to Koishi. Therefore, you're incentivized to cook and serve high-level recipes and drinks. It's a very good idea to actually cook whatever you want to serve in damage phase during the investigation phase. This way, you can store it, then immediately pull it out and throw it at Koishi, minimizing the time cooking during damage phase and immediately progressing the counter. Koishi actually has a hard cap of how much you can serve her per damage phase. You can only increase her counter by 20 before she resets back to investigation phase, making you redo the entire process. However, you can cheat a bit. You can manipulate what you serve Koishi so that you're 1 number away from resetting her, 19 damage. Then, serve the highest level recipe and drink you have. While Koishi will still reset after going past 20, the counter also still goes past 20. You can use whatever recipes you want to manipulate the number. I like using the combined number of 775 to reach 19, but you can do it multiple ways. Normally, you need 3 damage phases to beat Koishi, but if you do this correctly, you can beat Koishi using only 2 instead, meaning 1 less investigation phase to deal with and a lot of time saved. So, to sum everything up, use the priority system to quickly cook whatever the Koishi shadows want. Feel free to skip the shadows with black tags. Lastly, manipulate the counter so that you don't hit the 20 cap limit to maximize your damage. If you can do all this, Koishi is not a difficult boss at all. That is, until you get to Lunatic, which doesn't change the mechanics of the fight. Speaking of, this works for Lunatic as well. If you're trying to get all the badges, you can get all 4 of them just by doing Lunatic. Winning here unlocks Koishi as a rare guest for your Izakaya, a nice little cutscene, and access to the hot springs in former hell. Check it out, because it's got some nice pictures. DLC3, oh boy. Of the 4 boss fights so far, this is probably the easiest, I think. It's a lot more fair in the sense that RNG isn't as impactful here, unlike the others where you can be completely screwed depending on what tag you get. You've got 3 fights in a row against 3 Divine Spirit Mausoleum characters, Seiga, Tojiko, and Fudo. The fight will always be against them in that order, and you have to select each character to go up against them. During this fight, only DLC3 recipes will be on your menu. You will only be allowed to use the 5 default upgraded tableware. No special ones. However, you can still make custom recipes as needed. All your materials are provided for you, so you don't need to worry about consuming your own. Your objective is to score more money than the opponent by closing time, and you win 1 round when you do so. To win overall, you only need to beat 2 out of the 3 characters, but you can take on all 3 still if you go 2-0 within the first 2 rounds. There's 2 methods to approach these fights, but you can only use the second method once. You can either do these fights legitimately, or use the single-use cheese strategy to completely trivialize one enemy. We'll start with the legit way first. Your first opponent is Seiga, and how you want to deal with her depends on how much you want to deal with her mechanic. Her main gimmick is that she can prevent 3 guests from taking your orders for 20 seconds, leaving it free for her to swipe them from under you. She'll do this every 30 seconds. Your strategy can vary here, since Seiga is technically the weakest cook of the 3 opponents. Her cooking speed is average and she can move through walls, but despite the listed medium movement speed, she moves deceptively fast. When you serve someone but don't finish their complete order, a flag will be raised on their table, red for you and blue for the opponents. That means that the other side can't ever serve that one, so it's completely reserved. The opponent always tries and completes the order completely, giving both the drink and food, so you can take advantage of this. The best strategy here is to serve drinks to any table you want to serve. This pops the flag up for you, preventing the opponent from taking your table. This is especially important for rare guests, as you don't want the opponent serving them for more points over you. Afterwards, you can go back to your kitchen and cook whatever else you need. If you try to complete their order all at once, you run the risk of taking too long and just having the opponent take the guests you plan to serve. This strategy pretty much applies to all three fights here. Overall, you always want to try and go for rare guests first when you can, then regular guests. Since rare guests will always score more points for you, so long as you get a pink rating with custom orders. Sega isn't a very fast cook, so she's not too difficult if you use the table drink reserve strategy. It also goes without saying that you should be pre-cooking and entering hyper mode as fast as possible, then loop once it runs out. Use your tableware actively to cook and store extra food in storage, since you want to be utilizing everything you can. If you're using someone with toss serve, you have a huge advantage here. Your second opponent is Tojiko, who starts ramping up the difficulty. She's slower than Seiga, but that's not really saying much, since she still moves fairly quickly to any table, and she can teleport. She also casts lightning on your position every 10 seconds, and if it hits you, you get stunned. The teleport itself also has a chance to bring lightning on you. Once again, your strategy can vary here. You can either handle this with toss serving, which is pretty much the ultimate buff while avoiding lightning, or you can use Aoun here, who is immune to Tojiko's lightning. Using Aoun, however, means that you still have to run to each table, and getting to a table on the opponent's side can be tough without toss serving. This is honestly the easiest battle of the three, in my opinion, as Tojiko's teleport can't compete with toss serving, and Aoun is not only immune to her lightning, and works well with the table reserve strategy. Remember, you want pink ratings on the rare guest for the most points possible, so don't just serve them something from the menu. If you go 2-0 here, the battle with your next opponent, Fudo, is completely optional. But we're not cowards, so we're gonna take her on here. First, Fudo's fire. If you run into it, your controls will screw up for 3 seconds, and your dish will disappear if you're holding any. Second, Fudo also has toss serving straight from the get-go, so that advantage is gone for you. Lastly, her cutting board dishes are instant, so 3 of the recipes are instantly finished for her. The rest, she cooks pretty fast. If you're playing legit, Aoun is an awful matchup here, so if you want to play efficiently, don't use her here unless you've got no choice. You can completely avoid the fire by using any character with toss serving, while Aoun can't. Fudo pretty much does everything you do. The one advantage Mystia has, however, is that your guests eat instantly over Fudo's, meaning you can rack in more points while Fudo's needs time to eat. This delays her getting points. There's really not a lot of other strategies or tricks that can be utilized for Fudo specifically. Steal as many tables as you can by serving drinks first, then dishes. Avoid her fire when possible, and if you can't, make sure you're not holding anything when you have to run into it. Prioritize rare guests so Fudo doesn't get them, and eventually, you'll win. So that's a legitimate strategy. However, we have a one-time use, cheese strategy, that you can use in these series of fights to completely trivialize one battle. This works for any of the opponents too. First, select Aoun to be your cook. Then, wait for the guests to sit down. As soon as you see them order, serve them their drinks right away to pop your flag up, and prevent your opponent from serving them. If the opponent serves a couple before you reach the tables, it's fine, as you'll get another chance once those guests leave. Your goal is to raise your flags on all of the tables, preventing the opponent from cooking and serving. After you got all your flags up, enter hyper mode with Aoun. You can do this before guests sit down too if you like. It doesn't really matter, so long as you enter hyper mode quickly. Once you enter hyper mode, do not serve any of the guests' food. Aoun's hyper mode allows her to continue getting tips, which count as points for you from seated guests. Not completing any orders prevents new guests from sitting down. Since no new guests can be seated and all your flags are raised on each side, the opponent will be stuck standing there, unable to do anything. Meanwhile, thanks to Aoun's hyper mode, you'll continually rack up points without having to do anything further. Since Aoun has the infinite patience buff too, the guests will never leave from stalling, and thus, you'll win without needing to deal with the opponent's gimmicks the entire round. This works for every opponent, though the hardest to do it on is Fudo, since she can toss serve. Remember that you can only do this once, since you can't use Aoun again, so pick who you want to do this on. And with that, that's the end of this currently translated content for Touhou Mystia Izakaya in terms of bosses. Thanks to Evilus for allowing me use of his videos, as they were extremely helpful in getting everything you needed. I'll post a link to his channel below. Whether you've watched until the end, or you just wanted to see a particular battle, I hope that any of these tips, strategies, or information was of use to you. I had a ton of fun doing this and taking a break. Next up though, is probably more Fantasy Maiden Wars content, assuming my regular schedule allows it. Thanks for tuning in, and have a wonderful day.